If only we could fly.
Hi everyone! It's me, Risha,
And it's me, Krista.
and we're here to talk about stocks.
We said earlier, stock is a type of security that signifies ownership in a corporation and represent a claims on a part of the corporation's asset and earning.
There are two main types of stock, common and preferred. Common stock usually entitles the owner to vote in shareholders' meetings to receive dividends. Preferred stock generally not have voting but has a higher claim to assets and earnings than the common shares. For example, owners of preferred stock receive dividends before common shareholders and have priority in the event that a company goes bankrupt and in liquidated, also known as shares or equity.
Breaking down stocks. A holder of stocks has a claim to a part of the corporation's assets and earnings. In other words, a shareholder is an owner of a company. Ownership is determined by the number or shares a person owns relative to the number of outstanding shares. For example, if a company has 1,000 shares of stocks outstanding and one person owns 100 shares, the person would have a claim to 10% of the company's assets. Another definition of stocks. Some corporations may raise money for their expansion by issuing stocks. Stocks are shares in the ownership of the company. Owner of stocks may be considered as part owner of the company. There are two types of stocks, common stocks and preferred stocks. Both will receive dividends or shares of earning of the company. Dividends are paid first to the preferred shareholders. Stocks can be bought or sold at its current price called the market value. When a person buys some shares, the person receives a certificate with the corporation's name, owner's name, number of shares, and par per shares.
You've probably heard a popular definition of what a stock is. A stock is a share in the ownership of the company. Stock represents a claim on the company's assets and earnings. As you acquire more stock, your ownership stake in the company becomes greater. Unfortunately, this definition is incorrect in some keywords. You've probably heard a popular definition of what a stock is. A stock is a share of ownership of a company. Stock represents a claim on the company's assets and earnings. As you acquire more stock, your ownership stake in the company becomes greater. Unfortunately, this definition is incorrect in some key ways. To start with, stockholders do not own corporations. They own shares issued by corporations. But corporations are a special type of organization because a law treats them as legal persons. In other words, corporations file taxes, can borrow, can own property, can be sued, and more. The idea that the corporation is a person means that the corporation owns its own assets. A corporation office full of chairs and tables belongs to the corporation and not to the shareholders.
This distinction is important because corporate property is legally separated from the property of shareholders, which limits the liability of both the corporation and the shareholder. If the corporation goes bankrupt, a judge may order all of its assets sold, but your personal assets are not at risk. The court cannot even force you to sell your shares, although the value of your shares will have fallen drastically. Likewise, if a major shareholder goes bankrupt, she cannot sell the company's asset to pay off her creditors.
What shareholders own the shares issued by the corporations, and the corporation owns the asset. So if you own 33% of the shares of the company, it is incorrect to assert that you own 1/3 of the company. It is instead correct to state that you own 100% of 1/3 of the company's shares. Shareholders cannot do as they please with the corporation or its assets. A shareholder can walk out with a share because of corporation, not the shareholder. This is known as the separation of ownership and control.
So what good are shares? Then if they aren't actually the ownership right we think they are, owning stocks gives you the right to vote in shareholders meetings, receive dividends if and when they are distributed, and it gives you the right to sell your shares to somebody else. If you own a majority of shares, your voting power increases so that you can indirectly control the direction of company by appointing its board of directors. This becomes most apparent when one company buys another. The acquiring company doesn't go around buying up the buildings. It buys up all the shares. The board of directors is responsible for increasing the value of the corporation and often does so by hiring professional manager or officer such as chief executive officer or CEO. Distinction is important because corporate property is legally separated.
Property is legally separated.
The chair, the employees, if
Go.
it buys up all the shares, the board of directors is
Unfortunately, this definition is incorrect in some keywords. Isa pa. Is incorrect in some key ways. To start with, stockholders